She didn't raise her voice, not once. She picked up the card they threw on the floor, slid it back into her bag, and stood there, still, quiet, completely composed, while a man who worked for her called her trash in the lobby of her own hotel. Let me ask you something. Have you ever walked into a room you built and been treated like you didn't belong there? Have you ever been standing right in the middle of everything you worked for and someone looked right through you like you were invisible, like you were less, like the clothes on your back told the whole story of who you are? Because that's exactly what happened to Maya Richardson at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in Chicago. And what she did next, nobody in that lobby was ready for. Stay with me, because this story doesn't go where you think it's going. Chicago in late March has a particular kind of cold, not the brutal, bone-splitting cold of January, not the kind that makes you question every decision you've ever made. This is a softer cold, the kind that settles into your shoulders at the end of a long day and reminds you that rest is still somewhere far away. Maya Richardson had been awake for 19 hours. She'd flown in from Atlanta on a red-eye connecting through Dallas, landed at O'Hare at 9:15 p.m., and taken a cab directly to the Sterling Grand, one of 847 hotels she now owned across 23 countries. No driver waiting with a sign, no assistant texting her updates, no announcement, just a woman in faded jeans, white cotton shirt, and canvas sneakers, pulling a worn leather messenger bag through the revolving door of a five-star lobby. She chose to dress like that on purpose. She always did when she came to audit a property. Not to trap anyone, not to catch someone making a mistake. She dressed like that because she wanted to see the truth, the real truth, the kind that only shows itself when people believe nobody important is watching. And what she saw that night, in the first 30 seconds of walking through those doors, told her everything she needed to know about this particular location. The lobby of the Sterling Grand Chicago was genuinely beautiful. Crystal chandeliers that scattered light like scattered diamonds. Imported Italian marble floors, so polished you could see yourself walking across them. Hand-carved mahogany at the reception desk, warm and dark and heavy, with the kind of craftsmanship that costs real money. But beauty is just architecture. It doesn't tell you who lives inside it. Maya approached the front desk quietly. No drama, no announcement. Just a woman who'd been traveling all day, ready to check in, ready to take her conference call with Tokyo, ready to close the $200 million deal that had taken 6 months of work to reach. She placed her phone on the counter, the confirmation email visible on the screen. Sterling Grand Hotel, Penthouse Suite 4501. Guest, Maya Richardson. The man behind the desk, Derek Walsh, his name tag said, 8 years in luxury hospitality, looked at the phone. Then he looked at her. Then he looked back at the phone. And something shifted in his face. Not confusion, not a question. Something more deliberate than that. A decision. He'd already made up his mind about her before she'd said a single word. Before she'd done anything except exist in that lobby in those jeans and those sneakers with that worn bag. He'd looked at her and built an entire story in his head. Who she was, where she came from, what she could and couldn't afford, what she deserved. And he was so certain about that story. That's the part that stays with me. Not the cruelty of what came next, though what came next was ugly, and we're going to get there. What stays with me is the confidence, the absolute, unshakable confidence that he had her figured out. Because you've met that confidence before, haven't you? Not always in a hotel lobby, sometimes in a boardroom, sometimes in a store on Michigan Avenue, where a sales associate follows you through the racks like you came to steal instead of spend. Sometimes in a restaurant where the table by the kitchen appears, despite your reservation. Sometimes in a meeting where you've done the work, brought the numbers, know the material better than anyone in the room, and still, somehow, you have to prove yourself twice as hard just to be heard. That confidence, that assumption, that story someone writes about you before you've even opened your mouth. Maya had learned something about that kind of confidence a long time ago. The people who carry it the loudest are always the most fragile when the truth arrives. She would wait. She was good at waiting. She'd been building something for 15 years, learning to read rooms, learning when to speak and when to let silence do the work. She hadn't become the majority shareholder of a billion-dollar hospitality group by reacting every time someone underestimated her. She'd become that by understanding one thing most people never learn. Your real power doesn't need a costume. Derek Walsh had a system. You could tell by the way he moved, the practiced confidence, the theatrical size, the way he positioned himself slightly in front of the other staff, like a man who'd done this performance before and knew exactly how it ended. He picked up Maya's phone, barely glanced at the confirmation, set it back down with the particular kind of dismissiveness that isn't accidental. The kind that says, "I saw it and I don't care." "Anyone can Photoshop this garbage," he said, not quietly, not as a private observation, loud enough for the lobby to hear, loud enough for the elderly couple near the elevator to turn and look, loud enough for the young woman sitting in the corner, Jennifer Kim, to instinctively reach for her phone and hit record. He wasn't confused. He was performing. And the performance was for an audience, for Sarah behind the counter, for the security guard near the door, for every guest in that lobby who he wanted to witness him maintaining order against someone he'd already decided didn't belong. That's a specific kind of cruelty, the kind that needs witnesses, because private cruelty, at least, is between two people. But public cruelty, cruelty with an audience, that's a statement. That's someone saying, "Look at this. Look at what I can do to her. And look at how nobody stops me." Maya stood still. Her canvas sneakers didn't shift on that marble floor. Her breathing didn't change. Her face didn't break into the fear or the anger or the explanation that Derek was clearly waiting for, because that was the real game. Get her to react. Get her loud or crying or begging. Turn her into the story he'd already written about her. She didn't give him that. What she gave him was silence. And silence, when someone is expecting noise, is the most unsettling thing in the world. So Derek escalated. He pointed at her messenger bag. "That bag? I've seen better luggage at a gas station." He gestured at her sneakers. "Those are work shoes, manual labor shoes, not penthouse shoes." He leaned across the marble counter and explained, slowly, condescendingly, like he was speaking to someone who didn't quite understand the language, that this was a 5-star establishment, that they hosted Fortune 500 CEOs, foreign dignitaries, A-list celebrities, people of a certain standing. You see anyone else here dressed like they just rolled out of a Walmart parking lot?" Sarah giggled from behind the counter. That giggle, small and nervous, and wanting so badly to belong to whatever Derek was building in that moment. 24 years old, new to the job, watching her supervisor perform, and deciding that laughing along was safer than standing apart. You know how that works. You've seen it your whole life. The ones who don't have the courage to be cruel on their own, but who will absolutely hand the knife to someone who does. Patricia, the assistant manager, stayed quiet, but she didn't step in either. And sometimes staying quiet is its own kind of answer. The lobby was watching now. A businessman in a $1,000 suit had paused his phone call. The family with teenagers was hovering near the seating area, the kids wide-eyed, the parents uncomfortable but not moving. Jennifer's live stream was climbing. 47 viewers, then 89, then 156, then more. Maya checked her phone. 11:52 p.m. 8 minutes until Tokyo. 8 minutes until a $200 million call that had taken half a year to build. And she was standing in the lobby of her own hotel, listening to a man she employed explain to a growing crowd exactly why she didn't deserve to be there. Here's what I want you to understand about that moment. Maya Richardson wasn't a saint. She wasn't performing patience for some higher purpose. She was a woman who had been through enough of these moments. Enough lobbies, enough boardrooms, enough rooms where someone looked at her and saw only what they expected to see, that she had made a decision somewhere along the way. The decision wasn't to become hard. Hardness is easy. Hardness is just fear wearing armor. The decision was to become still. Still enough to watch. Still enough to let people reveal themselves completely before she responded. Still enough to know that the most powerful thing she could do in any room was refuse to become the character someone else had cast her in. Derek was still talking. His voice had reached that particular pitch, warm with contempt, almost friendly in its viciousness, where a man believes he's already won. He hadn't checked the one thing that would have changed everything. He hadn't checked the name. Not really. Not the way you check something when you're actually curious about the answer. He'd looked at that confirmation email the way people look at evidence that contradicts what they've already decided, briefly, dismissively, with the quiet certainty that it couldn't possibly mean what it said. Maya Richardson. Penthouse Suite. 4501. She'd paid for 6 nights, $16,800. From a corporate account he could have pulled up in 30 seconds if he'd wanted to know the truth. He didn't want to know the truth. The truth would have ruined the performance. And outside, Jennifer's phone was streaming all of it. Every word, every sneer, every giggle, to a number that was no longer 156 people. The clock on the lobby wall read 11:54. 6 minutes left. Maya's hand rested on the messenger bag. Inside it, a leather portfolio. Inside the portfolio, documents that would end careers, reshape the culture of an entire hotel chain, and answer every question Derek Walsh thought he'd already answered about who she was. But she wasn't going to open it yet. Let him finish. Let him go all the way to the edge. The people who are most certain they've already won, they always go all the way to the edge. There's something about a crowd that changes a person. Not always for the worse. Sometimes a crowd is what makes someone finally speak up, finally say the thing they've been swallowing for years because the room felt too small and the risk felt too large. Sometimes witnesses give people courage they didn't know they had. But sometimes, and you've seen this too, a crowd does the opposite. Sometimes a crowd is gasoline. Derek Walsh felt the room watching him, and instead of that awareness slowing him down, instead of some quiet internal voice suggesting that perhaps this had gone far enough, he expanded into it. The audience made him larger, more certain, more theatrical. Like a man who'd confused attention for approval and couldn't tell the difference anymore. He leaned across the counter again. "I've been working in luxury hospitality for 8 years," he announced, loud enough for the room. 8 years. And I know who belongs in a property like this and who doesn't. It's not something you can fake with a confirmation email and a sad messenger bag. Patricia stood slightly behind him, not agreeing out loud, but not disagreeing either. That middle ground, that careful, quiet neutrality that isn't neutral at all. I want to stay here for a moment, because Patricia's silence is its own story. Patricia Wong had been in hospitality for 11 years. She'd worked her way up from front desk to assistant manager through genuine effort and skill. She wasn't a cruel person by nature, but she'd learned somewhere along the way that survival in certain environments means choosing your battles, means reading the room, means understanding who holds the informal power and not getting caught on the wrong side of it. She'd watched Derek run this lobby for 3 years. She'd seen the pattern. She'd probably even felt uncomfortable with it. Privately, quietly, in the way that people feel uncomfortable with things they've decided they can't afford to change. So she stood there, slightly behind, saying nothing. And the thing about saying nothing while something wrong is happening in front of you, the thing nobody talks about, is that silence has a sound. It's not invisible. The person on the receiving end hears it just as clearly as the cruelty itself. Maya heard it. She'd been hearing that particular silence her entire life. The silence of people who knew better and chose comfort anyway. She didn't hold it against Patricia the way she held it against Derek. Derek had made a choice with full conviction. Patricia had made a smaller, quieter choice, the choice to protect herself. Maya understood that choice even as she recognized its cost. But understanding something doesn't mean excusing it. There would be a conversation for Patricia too, just a different one. Now, the young man who walked through those revolving doors at 11:55 p.m. He hadn't planned to be part of any of this. He was a business consultant, staying in room 2847, coming back from a late dinner, pulling his briefcase with the consulting firm logo through the lobby the way you do when your feet hurt and your mind is already in tomorrow's meeting. He stopped when he heard Derek's voice. He stood there for a moment, reading the room the way people with good instincts read rooms. And then he said the thing that shifted something in the air. "Maybe she does own the place." Derek's face darkened immediately. "Sir, this is a private matter." The man laughed, not unkindly, just honestly. "Half of Chicago is watching this on Instagram Live right now. This is about as private as Times Square on New Year's Eve." Jennifer's stream had reached beyond the lobby now. Tech industry networks were sharing it, Local news, Twitter accounts were picking it up. The hashtag was forming in real time, typed by people sitting in their living rooms across the city, watching a hotel manager publicly humiliate a black woman in canvas sneakers, while a marble lobby full of people did almost nothing to stop it. Almost nothing, because Marcus was watching too. Marcus Thompson, the security guard near the door. 6 feet of composure and training, standing at his post the way he'd been trained to stand, observing, assessing, waiting for clear instruction. Derek had called him over earlier, asked him to escort the guest out. Marcus had hesitated. That hesitation, small, barely visible, a fraction of a second, was everything. Because in that hesitation lived the question Derek hadn't asked himself once all night. What if I'm wrong? Marcus had suggested checking the employee handbook. He'd mentioned guest policies. He'd raised, carefully and professionally, the possibility that this situation wasn't what it appeared to be. Derek had waved him off. Now, Marcus stood watching Jennifer's phone screen from across the lobby. He could see the viewer count climbing from where he stood. He could see the comments scrolling, the outrage building in real time, city by city, screen by screen. And something in his training was screaming at him that he was standing at the edge of something that could not be undone. He was right about that. But here's the thing about that moment that I keep coming back to. Every person in that lobby, Derek, Patricia, Sarah, Marcus, the businessman from room 2847, the elderly couple near the elevator, the family with the teenagers recording on their phones, every single one of them was in the middle of a choice. Most of them didn't even know they were choosing. That's how it usually works. The choices that define us rarely feel like choices when we're making them. They feel like reactions, like instincts, like just doing what the situation seems to call for. Derek thought he was maintaining standards. Patricia thought she was staying safe. Sarah thought she was being loyal. The guests with their phones thought they were witnessing something, and they were, just not in the way they imagined. And Maya was standing in the middle of all of it, perfectly still, her hand resting on that worn leather bag, watching every single one of them make their choices in real time. She glanced at the digital clock above the reception desk. 11:57 p.m. 3 minutes. She'd been patient for 15 years. She could be patient for 3 more minutes. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A reminder. Tokyo in 3 minutes. Yamamoto Industries. $200 million and 6 months of negotiation sitting on the other end of that call. Derek was still talking. He'd moved on to something about fraud, about fake documents, about how certain kinds of people thought they could walk into certain kinds of places and claim things that didn't belong to them. Maya looked at him for a long moment. She thought about all the rooms she'd sat in over the years where someone had said something like that, not always so directly, not always so loudly, but always with that same underlying certainty, that same architecture of assumption. She thought about what it had cost her, not in money, not in deals, but in the quiet, private accumulation of moments like this one, moments you don't talk about at board meetings, moments you don't put in press releases, moments that live in the body long after the mind has moved on. She thought about the 47 formal complaints filed against this property in 3 months. 47 people who had walked through those revolving doors and been made to feel exactly the way Derek was trying to make her feel right now. 47 people who had mostly said nothing afterward, who had taken their business elsewhere and told their friends quietly and absorbed the cost of that moment alone. She was not going to absorb this one. Her phone buzzed again. Tokyo. Time. There is a specific kind of silence that only happens when a room discovers it was wrong. Not the silence of boredom, not the silence of waiting. This is the silence of a collective breath being held, of 20 people simultaneously realizing that the story they'd been watching had a completely different ending than the one they'd been expecting. That silence arrived at 11:59 p.m. in the lobby of the Sterling Grand Chicago. And it arrived all at once. Maya answered the Tokyo call first. That detail matters. She didn't reach for the portfolio, didn't make the announcement, didn't pivot dramatically toward Derek with the kind of theatrical reveal that the moment seemed to be building toward. She answered her phone. Yamamoto-san, yes, I'm ready. I'm conducting an audit I mentioned earlier. I'll have full findings for our board meeting tomorrow. She paused, listening. Her voice stayed level, businesslike, warm in the way of someone who has been in enough rooms with enough important people that importance itself stopped impressing her a long time ago. Yes, the discrimination issues are worse than we thought, but I have a comprehensive solution I'll be implementing immediately. Derek's face changed while she was still on the call, not all at once. It moved in stages, like watching ice crack from the center outward. First, the confidence drained. Then, something underneath it, something that had been propped up by the confidence, became visible. Something smaller. Something that had needed an audience and a performance and a lobby full of witnesses to feel real. Without those things, it was just a man standing behind a counter at midnight, sweating through his collar. Maya ended the call. She reached into the worn leather messenger bag, the bag Derek had compared to something from a gas station, and she pulled out the leather portfolio. She set it on the marble counter with the particular deliberateness of someone who is in absolutely no hurry. She opened her iPad, swiped to a specific page, turned it around so the reception desk could see it clearly. The Sterling Hotel Group corporate website, leadership page. Her photograph looked back at them from the screen. Same face, same woman. But in the photograph, she was wearing a tailored charcoal suit, her natural hair pulled back, the kind of professional composure that gets described in business profiles as formidable. Underneath the photograph, in clean corporate font, Maya Richardson, Chief Executive Officer, Richardson Ventures, majority shareholder, Sterling Hotel Group. The lobby didn't process it immediately. That's the thing about reveals. The real ones, not the ones in movies. In real life, the mind resists information that contradicts what it has already decided. There's a lag. A moment where the eyes see the truth and the brain keeps insisting on the story it built. Derek stared at the screen for a full 4 seconds without speaking. Sarah, behind the counter, had already pulled up the reservation system. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." She looked up at Maya, then back at the screen, then at Derek. "It's real. The penthouse reservation is real. It's been paid for 6 months in advance." She swallowed hard. The payment came from Richardson Ventures' corporate account, $16,800 for 6 nights. Maya let that number sit in the room for a moment, not for drama, because it was true. And truth, sometimes, needs a moment to land. Then she placed her business card on the counter beside the portfolio. Simple black lettering. No flourishes. Maya Richardson, Chief Executive Officer, Richardson Ventures. Derek reached for it slowly, the way a person reaches for something they half believe might not be real. That's impossible. You can't be... I can't be what, Derek? Her voice was still calm, still conversational. Still the same voice she'd been using since she walked through those revolving doors. I can't be successful. I can't own a billion-dollar company. I can't afford a penthouse suite in my own hotel. She looked at him steadily. Or do you mean I can't look like this and still be your boss's boss's boss? The lobby erupted. Jennifer's live stream chat moved so fast the words blurred together. She owns the hotel. No way. No way. Derek is so fired. I am screaming. Plot twist of the century. This is better than Netflix. Somebody call an ambulance for Derek. The businessman from room 2847 started slow clapping, unhurried, deliberate. The kind of applause that isn't celebratory so much as it is recognition. One professional acknowledging another in the only language the room had left. The family with the teenagers was recording everything. The elderly couple looked mortified, their hands pressed together, their eyes moving between Maya and Derek like people watching a building come down from a safe distance. Marcus stepped back from his post involuntarily. His hand moved to his security radio, not to call anyone, just because the training in his body needed somewhere to go. And Derek's legs buckled. Not dramatically, not like the movies, just a small involuntary give at the knees, the body registering what the mind was still refusing, and then his hands found the marble counter and held on. "Ma'am," he started, "if we had known, there was no way to identify. You weren't wearing..." Maya let the sentence die on its own. She didn't help him finish it. She didn't fill the silence with reassurance or explanation, or the diplomatic softening that people in power sometimes offer to make a difficult moment easier for everyone involved. She let him hear the end of that sentence in his own head. "You weren't wearing what, Derek?" Because that was the question. That was the only question that mattered in that lobby at that moment. Not what she was wearing, not what her bag looked like, not what her shoes cost or didn't cost. What exactly should a successful black woman wear to be treated with basic human dignity in her own establishment? She didn't ask it rhetorically. She asked it directly, quietly, with the full weight of a woman who had been asked to justify her presence in rooms she built, in spaces she earned, in establishments that existed because of her signature, on documents these people had never read. Patricia's mascara was tracking down her face. She wasn't making a sound, just standing there, very still, the way people stand when they realize that the choice they made 20 minutes ago, the choice to stay quiet, to stay safe, to let it happen, has just become part of the permanent record. Sarah was crying openly behind the counter. "I was just trying to fit in," she said, so quietly it was almost to herself. "I didn't want Derek to think I wasn't loyal." Maya looked at her for a moment, 24 years old, learning right now, in the worst possible way, what loyalty costs when it's given to the wrong person. There would be something to say to Sarah, later, privately, but not yet. Maya pulled the final document from her portfolio. The acquisition agreement, March 15th, 2025. Richardson Ventures, $847 million, 847 properties, 23 countries. She placed it on the counter without ceremony. Derek Walsh, employee ID 4471. You work for me. A pause. Patricia Wong, employee ID 4203. You work for me. Another pause. Sarah Mitchell, employee ID 4892. You work for me. Each name landed like a period at the end of a sentence that had been building for 47 formal complaints and 3 months of guests who had walked out of those revolving doors feeling smaller than when they walked in. Derek tried one last time. Ma'am, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. If you could just... Maya held up her hand, not angrily, not dramatically, just up. And he stopped. Power, when it finally arrives, doesn't always look the way you imagined it would. Sometimes it's loud. Sometimes it's a gavel, a verdict, a moment that announces itself with the full weight of everything that built toward it. Sometimes justice has a soundtrack and a crowd and a clear before and after line you can point to. But sometimes, and this is the kind that stays with you, sometimes it's just a woman standing very still at a marble counter, speaking at a normal volume, while everything around her quietly comes apart. Maya opened her laptop, connected it to the lobby's wall-mounted display screen. The kind of screen usually reserved for hotel announcements and local event listings now showed a presentation titled Immediate Reform Implementation, Sterling Grand, Chicago. Derek stared at it like a man watching his own obituary. Before I address your employment status, Maya said, I want to talk about what actually happened here tonight, not just to me, to everyone who came through those doors before me. She advanced to the first slide. 47, that number again. 47 formal complaints filed against this property in 90 days. And she didn't just say the number. She read from the reports, guest voices, one after another, in their own words. Staff treated me like I didn't belong. Manager assumed I couldn't afford my room. Was asked if I was sure I was in the right hotel. Made comments about my appearance that had nothing to do with my reservation. Each line landed in that lobby differently than the last, because these weren't abstractions. These were people. People who had packed their bags and made their reservations and walked through those same revolving doors with the same ordinary expectation that they would be treated like human beings, and had that expectation quietly, efficiently denied. Most of them hadn't filed formal complaints immediately. Most had said nothing in the moment, absorbed the cost privately, and taken their business elsewhere. Maya knew that for every formal complaint in that folder, there were probably 8 or 10 or 15 other guests who had simply left and never come back and told their friends in that quiet, specific way that Black women tell each other about places that don't deserve their money. That quiet word of mouth, that careful, protective warning passed between women who've learned that certain rooms aren't safe. That matters too. even if it never shows up in a corporate report. Derek listened to the complaint excerpts with his eyes fixed on the marble floor. His earlier confidence had completely evacuated. What remained was just a man standing in the rubble of his own certainty, trying to figure out how this had happened. But here's the thing about that question. How did this happen? That I want to sit with for a moment. Because the answer isn't complicated. It never is. It happened because Derek Walsh had been allowed to happen. For 3 years in that lobby, night after night, he had been running a system that filtered people by appearance and treated them accordingly, and the system had never pushed back. The complaints went into files. The files went into folders. The folders went to regional managers who had quarterly numbers to protect and staff shortages to manage and their own carefully maintained neutrality to preserve. Nobody said stop, so he didn't stop. That's not an excuse for Derek, not even close. A grown man with 8 years in hospitality and a functioning conscience knows the difference between a guest and a target. He made choices. Deliberate, sustained, consistent choices. The accountability for those choices belonged entirely to him. But the conditions that allowed those choices to continue, that's a larger conversation. That's what Maya had actually come to Chicago to address. She advanced to the next slide. Revenue figures. This property had seen a 23% revenue decline in the current quarter. Guest satisfaction rated 2.3 out of 5 stars. Staff turnover at 89% annually. Nearly the entire team replaced every year, which almost always means the same thing. People leave environments that feel wrong, and the ones who stay are the ones who've learned to perform the wrongness. Average nightly occupancy at 67% against an industry standard of 85% for luxury properties. This hotel is failing every measurable metric, Maya said quietly. And it's not failing because of the chandeliers, or the marble, or the thread count in the penthouse. It's failing because the people walking through those revolving doors, specifically certain people, have learned that they are not welcome here. And people who don't feel welcome don't come back. And they tell others. And slowly, quietly, a hotel that should be thriving becomes a hotel that can't figure out why the numbers keep going down. She closed the revenue slide. Discrimination is not just a moral failure, it's a business failure. It is always both. The lobby had gone very quiet. Jennifer's live stream was at 22,000 viewers now. Local news stations were calling the front desk. The hashtag had split into two: Sterling Hotel Racism and Sterling Hotel Reform, running simultaneously, feeding each other. Marcus was still standing at his post, but his entire posture had changed. He was leaning slightly forward now, the way people lean when they're genuinely listening, not performing attention, but actually receiving something. Maya turned to him directly. "Marcus, you hesitated when Derek asked you to remove me. You suggested checking employee policies. You raised the possibility that the situation wasn't what it appeared to be." She paused. That hesitation was the most professional thing that happened in this lobby tonight. Marcus straightened slightly, said nothing. But something moved across his face. Not pride exactly, but the particular quiet of a person being seen accurately for the first time in a while. Then she turned back to Derek and Patricia. You have 3 choices, and I need your decisions in 60 seconds. She held up one finger. Choice 1. Immediate resignation. You leave tonight. I provide neutral employment references that don't mention this incident. You keep whatever professional reputation you have left and the opportunity to build something different somewhere else. 2 fingers. Choice 2. Termination for cause. This incident goes on your permanent employment record. No references from Sterling Hotels. Possible civil litigation for brand damage. Future employers will see a discrimination-related termination when they call. 3 fingers. Choice 3. Full corporate investigation. Human resources review. Legal depositions. Your name's attached permanently to this incident in public records and news articles. 3 to 6 months minimum. She set her phone on the counter, started the timer. 60 seconds. And here is what I want you to notice about that moment. Not the choices she offered, though the architecture of those choices tells you everything about how her mind works. What I want you to notice is what she didn't do. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't reach for anger, even though anger would have been completely justified, earned, and human. She didn't make it personal in the small way, the wounded way, the way that would have satisfied the immediate feeling but undermined everything she'd actually built. She stayed in her authority, not the authority of reaction, the authority of someone who has been preparing for this moment, not this specific lobby, not this specific night, but this category of moment, for 15 years. Someone who learned a long time ago that the most devastating thing you can do to a system that tried to make you small is to demonstrate calmly and completely exactly how large you actually are. Derek's 60 seconds ran out. His voice, when it finally came, had lost everything that had made it loud earlier in the evening. "I'll resign," he said. "Tonight." Patricia nodded without speaking. Her mascara had dried on her face into thin, dark lines. She looked older than she had an hour ago. Not because of time, but because of what she now had to carry. Maya looked at them both for a long moment. Then she turned back to the laptop. "Good," she said simply. "Now let's talk about what comes next. If you've stayed with me this far, all the way to this point in the story, I want to stop for just a moment, not to recap, not to explain what you just heard, just to acknowledge something. You didn't have to still be here. There are 1,000 other things competing for your attention right now. 1,000 other voices, other stories, other screens. And you chose this one. You stayed. That tells me something about you. So before we get to the end of this story, and the ending matters, I promise you it matters, I want to ask you one thing. If what you've heard tonight has meant something to you, if you've seen yourself in any corner of this story, if you've felt something real while listening, subscribe to this channel. Turn on the notification bell, because we do this every single day. Stories like this one, stories that are worth your time. This community we're building here, it's for women who have stood in lobbies that weren't ready for them. Women who have been in rooms that tried to make them smaller. Women who kept building anyway. If that's you, and I believe it is, this is your home. Now, back to Chicago. Back to Maya Richardson at midnight in that marble lobby. Because what happened next is the part most people don't talk about. Firing Derek and Patricia was the easy part. I mean that sincerely. That decision took 60 seconds. The paperwork would take longer, but the decision itself, the clarity of it, the necessity of it, that required no deliberation at all. Some conclusions are already written before you arrive at them. You're just there to confirm what the evidence already decided. What came next was harder and more important. Maya picked up her phone and dialed Janet Davis, the regional manager, at 12 minutes past midnight. "Janet, I'm at the Chicago location. We have a situation that requires immediate intervention." She put it on speaker. The lobby listened. Within minutes, two things were set in motion. Keisha Williams, a 15-year hospitality veteran, one of the company's finest managers, a black woman who had spent her career turning broken properties into thriving ones, was being reassigned from Boston to Chicago, effective the following morning. Full authority, no committee, no transition period, immediate. And Dr. Amanda Foster, Sterling's diversity and inclusion consultant, was being scheduled for emergency training sessions with the entire Chicago staff within 48 hours. Maya turned to Sarah, 24 years old, still behind the counter, still waiting to find out what her future looked like. "Sarah, you participated in something harmful tonight. You laughed at a guest. You made comments that were cruel and unprofessional." Maya's voice didn't soften, but it didn't harden either. It stayed level, the tone of someone delivering truth as an act of care rather than punishment. "But you're 24, and 24 is still early enough to decide who you want to be." She paused. "Your employment is probationary for 90 days. You'll complete intensive retraining, unconscious bias, luxury hospitality standards, guest dignity protocols, and you'll work under Keisha Williams, who will teach you what this industry actually looks like when it's done right." Sarah nodded. Her eyes were red, but her spine was straight. Something in her posture had shifted, not from shame exactly, but from the specific weight of someone who has just been handed both accountability and a second chance at the same time, and understands, maybe for the first time, that those two things can coexist. Maya turned to Marcus. "You're being promoted, effective immediately, head of guest security and staff conduct, monitoring for this property. Your first responsibility is helping implement what I'm about to show you." She advanced to the next slide on the lobby display. The Guest Dignity Initiative. QR codes installed throughout the hotel, in elevators, corridors, restaurant spaces, every public area, linking directly to a real-time reporting system that bypassed local management entirely. Guest complaints going straight to corporate leadership. No filters, no gatekeepers, no regional manager deciding which concerns were worth escalating. New security cameras with audio recording in all public spaces. Not surveillance in the punitive sense, in the protective sense. Protection for guests who deserved to have their experiences documented. Protection for staff who deserved to work in an environment where false accusations couldn't be manufactured in the dark. Monthly unconscious bias training, mandatory for every employee, from maintenance to management. A new compensation structure that tied 20% of manager bonuses directly to guest satisfaction scores, specifically tracking the satisfaction of guests from communities historically underserved by luxury hospitality. Maya walked the lobby as she presented, moving through the space the way a person moves through something they own, not in the territorial sense, but in the responsible sense. The way a gardener moves through a garden they've neglected and are now committing to tend properly. Jennifer's live stream was still running. 22,000 viewers watching a CEO redesign her own company's culture in real time from a lobby in Chicago at midnight. The comments had shifted. Early in the night, they'd been outrage, justified, electric, the specific energy of witnessing wrong and wanting it named. Now they were something different, something quieter. This is what accountability actually looks like. She didn't just fire them, she fixed it. I've never seen anything like this. Maya closed the presentation and looked around the lobby one final time. The crystal chandeliers were still beautiful. The marble was still polished. The mahogany was still warm and dark and heavy with craftsmanship. None of that had changed. But a building is not a hotel. A building is just architecture. A hotel is what happens between the people inside it, between the person behind the counter and the person standing in front of it, between the assumption someone makes and the reality that arrives to correct it. This building had been a hotel that told certain people, quietly, consistently, over 47 documented complaints, and Lord knows how many undocumented ones, that they did not fully belong here. That was ending tonight. Not because Maya Richardson had walked through those doors in jeans and canvas sneakers, but because 47 people before her had absorbed something they shouldn't have had to absorb. Because the system that was supposed to catch this had looked away. Because silence, maintained long enough, becomes permission. She picked up her worn leather messenger bag from the counter where she'd set it at 11:47 p.m. She slung it over her shoulder, checked into the penthouse the way she should have been checked in an hour ago, professionally, efficiently, by Marcus, who handled the process with the quiet precision of someone who understood that this moment, small as it was also the first moment of something new. In the elevator, alone, rising toward the 45th floor, Maya allowed herself the one private thing she hadn't allowed herself in that lobby. Not anger. She was past anger, not triumph. Triumph felt too loud for what she felt. Just acknowledgement. A quiet internal nod to the woman she'd been at 29, 34, 41. All the earlier versions of herself who had stood in rooms not entirely unlike that lobby and absorbed things they shouldn't have had to absorb and kept building anyway and brought her here, to this elevator, to this floor, to this view of Chicago at midnight, the city spread out below like a second sky made of light. She had a board meeting in 6 hours. She opened her laptop, got to work. I want to tell you something before this ends, not about Maya, about you. You've been sitting with this story for nearly an hour, and if I know anything about the kind of woman who stays with a story this long, who listens all the way through, who doesn't skip to the ending, who lets the middle matter, I know something real about you. You've been in a lobby before. Maybe not that lobby, maybe not Chicago, maybe not a hotel, maybe not marble floors and crystal chandeliers, and a man with a name tag who thought he had you figured out before you opened your mouth. But a lobby, some version of it. A room that looked at you and decided before you arrived. A space that was supposed to be yours. By right, by work, by the simple fact of your humanity, and made you prove it anyway. Made you stand there and be still and carry the weight of someone else's assumption while a clock ticked somewhere and something important waited on the other side of the indignity. You know that feeling. The question I want to leave you with, and I mean this genuinely, I'm not asking it to be poetic, is what you did with the stillness. Because that's the part of Maya's story that doesn't make the headlines, that doesn't trend on Twitter, that doesn't get 22,000 viewers on a live stream. The stillness. 15 years of building something real, quietly, without an audience, without announcement, while rooms full of people made their assumptions and wrote their stories about her and decided what she could and couldn't be. 15 years of choosing not to become what those rooms expected. That's not exceptional patience. I want to be careful here. I'm not saying black women should have to be patient. I'm not saying the burden of grace belongs to the person being wronged. That's not the lesson. That's never been the lesson. What I'm saying is something different. I'm saying that Maya Richardson walked into that lobby already knowing who she was. Not because of the $847 million. Not because of the acquisition agreement or the business card or the photograph on the corporate website. Because of the 15 years before all of that. Because of every room that tried to make her doubt herself and didn't succeed. Every lobby, every boardroom, every moment of quiet contempt she absorbed and didn't let define her. Every time she picked up what someone threw on the floor, literally that night, with the credit card, and kept moving. That's the thing that built the company. Not the capital, not the strategy, not the connections or the timing or the market conditions. The decision, made somewhere early, renewed constantly, never fully finished, to remain herself inside spaces that were designed to make her someone smaller. You don't have to own 847 hotels for that decision to matter. You just have to make it, in your lobby, in your room, in whatever space is currently asking you to be less than you are. The decision is always available. That's what this story is actually about. Not the firing, not the reveal, not the clock running down to midnight, or the live stream or the hashtag. The woman who bent down to pick up a card that had been ground into the floor, who straightened up, who looked at the clock, who waited. Not because she had no power, because she already knew exactly how much she had. There's a question I want you to sit with tonight, not to answer here, just to carry. When was the last time a room tried to make you smaller, and you didn't let it? Leave that answer in the comments if you feel moved to, not to perform it, not to impress anyone. Just because sometimes writing a thing down makes it real, in a way that keeping it inside doesn't. And if someone in your life needs to hear this story today, someone who is standing in their own lobby right now, carrying something heavy, wondering if the building they've been constructing in silence actually matters, send this to them. Don't think about it. Just send it. 5 people. That's all I'm asking. 5 people who deserve to feel seen today. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. We are here every single day, building something real, one story at a time, for women who have earned every room they've ever walked into and then some. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what story do you want to hear next? What moment? What kind of woman? What corner of this life do you want us to bring to this channel? We're listening. We always have been.